asking the question, why? What was driving Dick Cheney and the others who were so relentlessly and systematically pushing this agenda about which they had said nothing to voters who were running campaigning for office? Where was this coming from? This question took me to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library, where the National Archives houses a bookcase full of documents in gray boxes titled Richard Cheney Files. From that pile of memos, written when a 33-year-old Cheney had become the youngest White House Chief of Staff in American history, in 1975, the answers to what motivated this push emerged. Now, to explain the origins of Cheney's worldview, I need to back up even further, just briefly, to review what the founders had to say about how government checks and balances was supposed to operate, even in the face of national security threats. And then I'll fast forward again to how the United States began to stray from that vision in the decades leading up to Cheney's inauguration in government during the early Cold War. In 1787, when they sat down to draft the Constitution, the founders brought with them a very realistic, and some would say pessimistic, view of human nature. They knew that human beings are flawed, and that it was inevitable that from time to time, some misguided or incompetent leaders would win positions of responsibility in government. And they also knew that people could not be trusted to do the right thing with their power on their own. And so they designed a system that was to prevent the concentration of too much government power in any one official's hands. The basic outline of their system, high school civics, was to give Congress broad power to enact laws establishing rules and regulations within which the president had to operate. The founders made clear that they wanted Congress, the body of elected representatives of the people, to be the independent branch that made the tough decisions about trade-offs in such thorny matters as how the commander-in-chief can treat captured enemies in wartime. Despite the tremendous threats facing the fledgling nation, they believed that America would be more secure, not less, if the commander-in-chief were subject to the rule of law. Now, there were some short-term bumps along the way, but this system endured essentially intact for 160 years. But then, amid the national security fears of the early Cold War, President Harry Truman, a Democrat, launched a constitutional revolution. In 1950, Truman took us to war in Korea without going to Congress for permission. And this launched the era of what historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. called the imperial presidency. Truman and his successors of both parties embraced the theory that presidents have broad, unwritten, but inherent power to protect national security as they alone see fit. And for 2 decades, members of the Congress largely sat on their hands as one president after another began asserting the right to set aside the rules at their own discretion, along with related power grabs, such as keeping ever more information secret about what the executive branch is up to from congressional committees and from the courts. Presidential power thus steadily escalated for 2 decades, peaking during the Richard Nixon administration. But Nixon pushed the logic of imperial presidential power to its breaking point, and his presidency came crashing down with the abuses that we know as the Watergate scandal. And in the wake of the twin disasters of Watergate and Vietnam, Congress reawakened. It began conducting meaningful oversight again, and it began passing a series of laws reimposing controls on presidential power, intended to prevent future abuses. And understanding that moment in history is critical for understanding what is happening today. Because, as I said, that moment, Dick Cheney was White House Chief of Staff to Gerald Ford. And day upon day in the Ford White House, Dick Cheney was confronting a Congress that was determined to reimpose constitutional control on White House power. From his vantage point, this did not look like a necessary constitutional correction. It looked like an outrage. He and his colleagues felt they were being punished for Richard Nixon's personal failings, and that they were different, and that they could be trusted with these unchecked powers that were briefly run. They felt that these reforms would weaken the commander-in-chief, and hence America. And Cheney and those who felt like him would spend the next 30 years working to roll back the changes of the 1970s and to restore presidential power to the inflated levels that it had briefly reached before Nixon fell. See Cheney's agenda play out in the record of the decade that he spent as a member of the House of Representatives, when he continuously argued with his colleagues that they gave the president, choosing the president, more flexibility not less, in foreign affairs and national security matters, not just during the Iran-Contra debate, but throughout that entire decade. You can see it in his tenure as Secretary of Defense to George H.W. Bush, when he unsuccessfully urged the first President Bush to launch the Gulf War without going to Congress for permission, just like Truman, as a demonstration that it is always